Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are looking at a really fascinating paradox. When we think about how emerging superpowers operate on the global stage, we kind of just assume there's this single, heavily guarded master plan locked away in a capital city somewhere, right? But when it comes to India, a nation of over 1 billion people with a rapidly booming economy, the outside world, and honestly even top geopolitical experts often completely misunderstand how it thinks about its place in the world. We're always trying to fit India into these neat little boxes, and it just doesn't work.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it completely shatters the illusion of a single master plan. India is absolutely not some monolithic actor pulling levers from behind a curtain. It's a massive, complex, and incredibly vocal democracy. The constant noisy internal debates aren't some distraction from their grand strategy. Those debates actually are the strategy. It's like the friction is the feature, not a bug.
Okay, let's dive into this and map out our journey. First up, we'll tackle the grand strategy myth. Then, we'll unpack 3 competing strategic visions, followed by the China catalyst. After that, we'll weigh ambitions versus reality, and finally wrap things up with questions for the future.
Section 1. The Grand Strategy Myth. For decades, Western analysts have looked at India and basically asked, hey, where's your unified strategic doctrine? And because India didn't produce a neat, singular document that mirrored Western foreign policy, people just assumed they didn't have one. But the truth is, India's grand strategy is plural. Multiple distinct traditions coexist at the exact same time. Depending on the era, who's in leadership, and the specific crisis at hand, different strategic traditions take the steering wheel. So to really understand India, we've got to stop looking for one master strategy and start looking at how multiple strategies blend together.
So the crucial point uniting all this is something called strategic autonomy. Historically, you've probably heard India was famous for non-alignment during the Cold War. But here's the thing. Non-alignment was never really about pacifism. It was actually a hard-nosed refusal to let other superpowers dictate who India's friends should be. Fast forward to today, and that has evolved into strategic autonomy. Basically, it means India wants the absolute freedom to partner with the US on tech, buy oil from Russia, and negotiate with Europe strictly on an issue-by-issue basis. They don't want to sign a formal treaty that locks them into a single bloc. And honestly, this flexibility directly impacts the global trade networks and security architectures that every single one of us relies on.
Section 2. 3 Competing Strategic Visions.
So, if the strategy is plural, who are the main actors? Well, there are 3 main philosophies fighting for dominance in New Delhi right now. First up, we have the Nehruvian tradition. This one focuses heavily on liberal idealism, moral leadership, and keeping strict autonomy. Next, you have the Kautilyan approach, named after the ancient Indian strategist, which is pure, unadulterated realpolitik. Think hard power, balancing threats, and very cold security calculations. And finally, there's the nationalist tradition, which is currently championed by the ruling BJP. This focuses much more on civilizational identity and majoritarian assertiveness. Now, it's the synthesis of these 3 very different visions that actually creates the policy you see playing out on the global stage.
If you've ever wondered why India flat out refuses to join formal military alliances, or why they maintain a doctrine of credible minimum deterrence with their nuclear weapons, instead of just jumping into a massive arms race, it's not just because of budget limits. It's because of this gravity. Their choices are so deeply rooted in their civilizational identity and strategic culture, and it takes an enormous amount of energy to escape that pull.
And we absolutely can't forget that all of this is heavily anchored by domestic politics. The constant demands of coalition governments, the power of federal states, powerful economic lobbies, and those ideological shifts toward majoritarian nationalism, they aren't just background noise. They literally build the grand strategy. India's foreign policy is deeply, deeply tethered to what is politically survivable at home.
Section 3. The China catalyst.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive external shift India is facing right now. For decades, Pakistan absorbed a huge amount of India's strategic bandwidth. But today, Pakistan is becoming a declining variable in the grand scheme of things, and China is the ascendant variable. Beijing is now absorbing the absolute majority of New Delhi's strategic planning. The threat perception is migrating almost entirely northward.
Following the post-2020 border crisis at Gowan, literally everything changed. The towering Himalayan mountains are no longer this comfortable geographical buffer. They are an active, highly militarized frontline. And this intense pressure from China is exactly why India is slowly inching toward a quasi-alliance architecture, like the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia. They are doing this while simultaneously and desperately trying to preserve that strategic autonomy we were just talking about.
But it's not just the mountains. Historically, India's strategic culture has been almost entirely obsessed with land power. The oceans were, honestly, kind of an afterthought. Well, that is changing rapidly. The Indian Ocean is becoming the new strategic center of gravity. We're now seeing a belated but very genuine naval expansion by India to counter Chinese influence in its maritime backyard. This is a massive geopolitical pivot, and it directly impacts the security of global shipping lanes and international trade.
Section 4. Ambitions versus reality.
Now, it's super easy to talk about high-level strategic theory, naval expansions, and balancing superpowers. But the gritty truth is, India faces some severe institutional bottlenecks. Their National Security Council system often struggles with dysfunction. You've got major gaps in coordination between different government ministries. The primary defense research agency, the DRDO, is heavily bogged down in bureaucracy. And the private sector has historically been pretty excluded from driving defense innovation. So India's global ambitions are routinely outpacing its actual internal institutional capacity.
This might be the most urgent reality check in this entire explainer. Given the lightning-fast pace of Chinese military modernization, India's historical reliance on foreign weapons, especially from Russia, is a massive vulnerability. To truly stand as a great power in the 21st century, establishing a robust indigenous defense industrial base is no longer just optional for India. It is an absolute necessity for survival.
There is a massive gap between what India wants and what it can currently execute across the board. India rightly aspires to a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and it positions itself as a leader in the Indo-Pacific. Yet its economic statecraft remains remarkably underdeveloped. Unlike China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, India lacks a cohesive geo-economic tool at that scale, though to be fair, efforts like the International Solar Alliance are definitely a step in that direction.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the modern battlefield. Technology. The tech you and I use every single day relies on space, cybersecurity, AI, and semiconductors. Overcoming those institutional bottlenecks we just talked about in these specific tech sectors is exactly what will define India's standing in the international order. It's literally going to shape the global tech supply chains we all depend on for the next 50 years.
And just a quick note on soft power. India has incredible peacetime assets. We're talking Bollywood, massive global diaspora networks, and a historic reputation as the world's largest democracy. But that soft power is incredibly fragile. These diplomatic dividends can be easily undercut by domestic issues, like reports of democratic backsliding or communal violence. And let's be real, soft power tends to completely evaporate the moment an actual military conflict begins.
Section 5. Questions for the future.
So based on this huge, complex synthesis of traditions, bureaucratic hurdles, and rising external threats, the planners in New Delhi are wrestling with some massive unresolved dilemmas right now. Can they clear out the bureaucracy and industrialize their defense sector before the capability gap with China becomes completely permanent? What actually happens if nuclear deterrence fails, considering their doctrine relies entirely on assuming everyone is a rational actor? And ultimately, does India actually need a formal military alliance, or would signing a treaty absolutely destroy the very strategic autonomy brand that gives them so much leverage today?
I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought. As the world seemingly fractures into a rigid bipolar order dominated by the US and China, is India's cherished strategic autonomy actually sustainable? Can you really remain a free agent in a world that increasingly demands you pick a side? Or will the gravity of the global system eventually force India into a harder alignment? It is arguably the most important question for the future of Asia, and I hope this explainer has given you the framework to watch it all unfold. Keep exploring and keep asking the big questions.